today. UFC Macau went down last Saturday morning for us in the US, and I have a few takeaways on today's episode of Matter of Fact MMA. What's up? What's happening? Let's go. What's up, guys? We right back at it. We right back with it. It's your boy Matt, and I'm here to deliver just a few takeaways from UFC Macau. You know what I'm saying? First off, main event. Piotr Yan goes out there and defeats Davison Figueiredo by unanimous decision. Takeaways from this bout. Piotr Yan is still that dude. The Russian James Bond himself is still that guy. As he goes out there, and he looked great on all fronts, right? Striking was on point. Defense was on point, at least at the beginning of the fight. Takedown defense was on point. Grappling defense was on point. But when it went to the ground, Piotr Yan was scrambling back to his feet. You know what I'm saying? Bro, Piotr Yan looked solid. He looked like he was back in the form that he was when he lost the title to Aljamain Sterling. Now, with that being said, how about Figgy Smalls? You know what I'm saying? How about Davison Figueiredo, who went in there against this form, this version of Piotr Yan, landed shots and slowed him down at times. Piotr Yan, in my opinion, for the most part, he didn't dominate this fight, but he kind of did dominate this fight. He was always in the driver's seat, right? Piotr Yan was clearly always in the driver's seat of this. Every now and then, Davison Figueiredo would reach his arm over, like from the passenger side, and turn the wheel. And the car would kind of swerve a little bit, and then Piotr Yan would take control of the car again. That's the way I would label this fight, right? The thing is Davison Figueiredo is so good at what he does that he was able to make the car swerve. You know what I'm saying? Like, Davison Figueiredo would be getting beat. He would be getting beat. He would be getting beat. And then out of nowhere, he would catch Yan with some sort of a weird shot at a weird angle that had power, and it would slow Yan for a split second where Yan's like, oh, Figgy's still coming correct. You know what I'm saying? And that's the way it was. And then Piotr Yan would be back in the driver's seat. Maybe Figgy would scramble for a takedown. And you're like, oh, okay, Figgy. You know what I'm saying? And it stayed a fairly back and forth fight throughout all 5 rounds. Again, I feel like Piotr Yan was always clearly in the driver's seat, but still, Figgy Smalls made it very intriguing and competitive at moments. So when I'm looking at that, I don't know if Davison Figueiredo will ever be the bantamweight champion of the world. Because when you look at that upper level of bantamweights, there's a lot of top pressure heavy wrestlers, and Davison, in my opinion, he generally, even though he's up at bantamweight, so he doesn't have to worry about stamina as much as flyweight, I still think that his stamina, his gas tank, I don't think is a match for Merab's, and I don't think it's a match for Umar's. I think Davison has plenty of fun fights at the top of the division. I would love to see him and Sean O'Malley. You know what I'm saying? I would love to see him and Corey Sandhagen. I think he's got a lot of fun fights in his future that are right there for the taking. You know what I'm saying? But I don't know if he's ever going to get that title, because the two dominant forces at the top of the division, being the champ Merab and being Umar coming, you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like those are two total different animals for Figueiredo's style. And I think Figueiredo's style just doesn't play out well against those two. But he still showed that he can go in there and put on some fun fights, fast-paced fights, and do some wild stuff, you know what I'm saying? But Piotr Yan moves on. He's calling, of course, for a fight against Merab. I kind of feel like the UFC is going to put him in the octagon with Sean O'Malley whenever Sean O'Malley can return, and the winner of those fights, that fight, will go on to face the champion. Because I think one way or the other, even though Merab is ducking him, Merab's going to end up fighting Umar Nurmagomedov, and that's just where that's going to go. So that was my takeaway from that, as something is in my eye. Let's move on to the co-main event, in which Yan Xiaonan goes out there and defeats Tabitha Ricci. Yan Xiaonan said, y'all must have forgot. Y'all must have forgot that I went out there and started putting a pace on Zhang Weili. You know what I'm saying? I started putting a pace on Weili about the third round on. When Weili started to get tired in their title fight, Yan went in there and started putting a pace on her, bro. She just didn't let Weili skate away. Now, Weili rightfully won the fight, but still, that was what I was seeing in the build-up. I didn't understand why it seemed like it was some people picking Tabitha Ricci. I didn't really get that, because in my opinion, Yan Xiaonan, I apologize, had the reach, she had the range, and I knew she was going to do her thing against Tabitha Ricci. And the way she was looking, man, put her back in the octagon with the champ, and let's go ahead and get this rectified, because I think the last 2 rounds of their title fight, when Weili got tired, were close enough. And she showed this dominance over Ricci, who's been going out here and beating a lot of women that I felt like she shouldn't beat. More power to her, credit to her. She beat them. She was no match for Yan. You know what I'm saying? She was just no match, bro. She was no match. Put her back in there. Outstanding performance from her. Now, let's move on down the line. Wang Song. I've been pronouncing it as Wang Kong. I believe it's pronounced Wang Song. Hopefully I'm correct about that. Against Gabriela Fernandez. So here's the thing, man. Wang Song has talked a good game. She has the swagger. She has the confidence. She dresses like the Joker in the weigh-ins. You know what I'm saying? She is outstanding for that division. But as I'm watching that fight, she's a little bit too theatrical and dismissive of her opponent, is what I was thinking during the first round. I had to look at her name again, because that's how much this fight was about Song. Gabriela Fernandez is just getting worked the entire first round. She has nothing for Song. And I'm watching Song play with her and move in with like utter disgust of her striking ability and just dominating her and picking her apart. And while I'm watching this, I'm thinking, this is probably about to go bad, because that's just how it is in MMA. When you see someone that has such a disdain, a fighter that has such a disdain for their opponent's abilities, if they don't get that opponent out early, mark my words, keep watching MMA, and this point will always be proven that I'm making that fighter's going to lose. So I'm watching the disdain she has for Gabriela's striking and her abilities, and I'm like, you shouldn't have did that. F around and find out. This is probably about to go wrong. And then I'm hearing the stories that the commentators are talking about, and one in particular in which I believe it was Laura Sanko that said, Song said that Gabriela's striking and speed was about as good as her aunt's. And I was writing that comment on posts on ESPN's MMA page and UFC's MMA, UFC's YouTube page, I should say, and ESPN MMA's YouTube page. I'm writing that because I'm like, so she moves with the speed of your aunt. Her striking reminds you of your aunt. And then you go out there and get waxed. And I was writing, you should have been training with your aunt then. The disdain she had for Gabriela's striking in the first round, it told me all I needed to see. And then we saw what ended up happening in the second round, where she gets caught with a punch, she gets hurt, she couldn't recover, and then she got choked out. You know, she had so much disdain that even when she got hurt and the girl moves behind her and starts to snatch her neck, there was no type of fight for the hands or anything. You know what I'm saying? So down goes Frazier. Down goes another contender in the women's division. You know what I'm saying? This one at, let me double check, flyweight. That, you know, we need characters. We need people that are going to sell tickets. And that was who I believe she was going to end up being. Of course, you know, we didn't really know how far she was going to go skill-wise, but she looked like she had the skills to pay the bills. But she had a little bit too much disdain for her opponent's abilities, and she gets laid out and choked out. So that's the end of that. And, you know, it's not like we're necessarily going to get behind Gabriella. I mean, cool story, bro. You know, shout out to her and her family and all the things they were going through, her going into this fight, but still. So, Song takes a loss. Moving on, Volkan Ozdemir stepped in there with Carlos Ulberg. Quick takeaway from this, I feel that Carlos Ulberg, within time, in that, I feel like that fight was going to be way closer had Ozdemir not started to kind of gas out. He started to get frustrated at the movement of Ulberg, and then he gassed after. And Ulberg went ahead and did his thing. Had that not happened, we might have saw a different ending to that fight. That's no shade on Ulberg. He still got that aura. He's still that dude, but we'll see where he goes from here. Carlos Ulberg gets the win. Zhang Mingyang knocked out Ozzy Diaz, and that was pretty quality to see because he just went in there like a force. Like, it was Alex Pereira-esque, you know what I'm saying? So that was cool to see. But the one I really want to talk about, the one I really want to get into, is my girl, Shi Ming. Shi Ming goes out there and defeats Fang Zhaohan. Here's the thing, man. This story was the best story coming out of UFC Macau. I was not familiar with Shi Ming. I was not familiar with her game. I was not familiar with it at all. This was the best story coming out of this. I'm watching this and I'm thinking, okay, this is another road to the octagon fight. You know, let's see how this goes down. But they start telling her story. And they say she's a doctor. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. That's interesting. She's a doctor by day. Then they say she stays up almost the entire night, every night, training for MMA. And then she wakes up the next day, probably only gets an hour or two of sleep. She goes back out there and she's still a doctor. Right? And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. But then it gets even more interesting when they start talking about that her mom and dad, her parents, have no idea that she's an MMA fighter. They have no idea she was on the road to the octagon. They have no idea that she is now in the UFC. They have no idea that she's become a TikTok star. They have no idea of any of this. And when you look at this girl, you know what I'm saying, Chinese girl, you look at this and if you kind of have an idea about their culture, you know, and even if you just seen it in media, if you just seen it in movies and TV shows and things, and it all began to click with me, it all began to fit, because I'm like, of course her parents wouldn't know that she's a star on TikTok. Of course they would have no idea that she's in the UFC, that she just leveled a girl, one of the most vicious head kick KOs that we have ever seen in life in the UFC. You know what I'm saying? They had to bring a stretcher in the octagon. You know what I'm saying? They're stalling. They're going to commercial breaks. You know, they're going to commercial breaks they don't have. They pulling sponsors out the woodwork because they need to buy time, because they got to put this girl on the stretcher and get her out the octagon. You know what I'm saying? Bro, this girl, for me, stole the show, because I'm watching this fight and they're talking about the fact that she, and I don't mean she as in SHE, I mean as her name, SHI, It's amazing. They're talking about her, and she's getting worked this whole fight by Fang, who is a bigger opponent, tall, rangy, dangerous striker. You know what I'm saying? And I'm watching this, and she is getting pieced up the first 2 rounds. Pieced up. And they're talking, they've been building up her story, and, you know, the doctor and her parents don't know what she's doing. And even if she wins here tonight, her parents still might not know that how, you know, what she's accomplished. And she seems so calm and collected and mild-mannered. And I'm watching this, and she's getting worked these first 2 rounds. And I'm like, man, this is ugly for Shi. But, you know, more power to her. Shout out to her. You know, the woman is going after her dream. And hopefully after she takes this L, the UFC can find something for her to do, you know, throw her in some fights, because they, you know, they could always use somebody in her weight division. And then the 3rd round starts, and the Michael Bisping is talking about, you know, her corner was telling her, you know, you've got to throw caution to the wind. You got to go out there. You have to finish her. You have to knock her out. But more importantly, they were saying, you really need to get this fight to the ground. We believe that's your path to victory, that you can submit her, right? And she goes out there, and you're watching it. It's like you're watching that first minute of the 3rd round, and you're like, man, I don't know if she's going to be able to pull this off. And you could tell she had a little bit of urgency in the way she was moving in on Fang and the way she was moving in for her strikes. And I'm watching this, and right after, Michael Bisping just got finished elaborating that her corner feels like she needs to get the fight to the ground to win, but she needs to do something because she's lost the first 2 rounds. She pulls off the head kick heard around the world. And the crazy thing is the head kick heard around the world was really Leon Edwards over Kamaru Usman. But this was far more vicious. Far more devastating, because Kamaru was able to get back to his feet while they was raising Leon's arm at the end of the fight. You know what I'm saying? Bro, she laid a devastating head kick to the neck of Fang, sent her to the ground, and Fang, no disrespect to her, didn't wake up for a long time. And they're stalling, and she is up against the side of the octagon, and she is definitely worried. She's alarmed. She's fearful as to what happened to her opponent. They had to cart this woman out of the octagon, carry her out on a stretcher. And they're bringing you updates the entire night. You know what I'm saying? That's how bad, how devastating a knockout was. She does her post-fight interview, and you could tell this girl felt for what happened to her opponent. She gets emotional. She was like, she's such a young girl, and, you know, she's this, she's that. It was amazing. This was theater. This was epic. This was great theater, bro. Shout out to Shi. I cannot wait to see her back in the octagon again. I hope they do clever matchmaking and put her against somebody that she easily beats. Let's throw her in there. I'm not saying put her in there with some cans, but you know how Mick Maynard and Sean Shelby do. They know the ins and outs of a lot of these fighters and their skill set. Put her in there with some fighters with a skill set that she is going to shine and at least get a few more wins under her belt. Because I needs to see more of her in the octagon. It just fit. Photos came out of her, and one of these photos I'm gonna find and make be the cover of this video, the thumbnail, because bro, they had a photo that someone had cut together of her fighting and her as a doctor, and it's just epic, and it's just like. It's every now and then a fighter comes along in the UFC. Now, I'm not saying this girl's going to be a champion or she's a world beater, but I just like the story. I just like the contrast from what she does by day and she's out there murking women at night. You know what I'm saying? It was outstanding. Shout out to UFC Macau. I'm not even going to get into any of the other fights. It was a good card. A lot of finishes. A lot of knockouts, a lot of back and forth battles. I'm not even really going to get into all of that. You know, I just wanted to highlight a few of these, a couple of takeaways. It was outstanding. Shout out Shout out to Shi Ming. Shout out to Piotr Jan. Shout out to Zhang Xiaonan. Shout out to all of them. It was a pretty good card. Sneaky good card. So anyway, we have an off week at least in the UFC, but we have some PFL Bellator going down later this week that we'll be talking about. So once again, I do want to thank you guys for joining me for another episode of Matter of Fact MMA. And I'll check you next time. Peace.